want.
Still.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm just going to provide a brief overview of today's business. So the committee will receive oral evidence from the Department for Infrastructure on the review of residence parking, receive an oral briefing from the Assembly's Research and Information Service on compensation for agricultural landowners affected by the construction of new roads in Northern Ireland. We're going to consider one statutory rule and one proposal for a statutory rule subject to Assembly procedure, and consider one proposal for a statutory rule that is not subject to Assembly procedure. So I'm just letting those aware who are in attendance in the public gallery that you can use your mobile devices through a Wi-Fi connection. All devices should be muted. 3G, 4G and 5G should not be used, and no recordings or photographs are to be taken. I just want to say a special welcome. We have somebody who is joining us today. He's on work experience with Stephen Dunlop, Rhys Irwin, so you're very welcome to the committee. I hope this committee doesn't put you off a life in politics, but you're very welcome to sit in today in terms of the Infrastructure Committee. So if members are content, we're going to proceed through the agenda. So apologies, don't have any apologies, but Danny and Mark are joining us online today. Declarations of interest remind members that they are obliged to declare any relevant financial or other interests which might reasonably be thought by others to influence their approach to the matter under consideration. Any members who have interest to declare in relation to today's business should do so now or when the particular matter arises in the meeting. So does any member have any interest they wish to declare? I just want to declare that I do have my husband's family live on the A5 and would be landowners on that route. Okay, chairperson's business, termination of the vehicle testing equipment contract. I just wanted to flag this up to members and remind members that following the oral evidence session and closed session with officials from DVA at its meeting on the 6th of November, the committee was advised that legal proceedings were scheduled to be heard on the 16th and 17th of January. At its meeting on the 11th of December, the committee considered broader legal advice on the scope or limitations in considering issues of commercially sensitive nature in the context of live legal proceedings, and agreed, and I quote, to defer consideration of any potential next steps, including oral evidence from Construction and Procurement Delivery and the Strategic Investment Board, until after a judgment has been determined in respect of ongoing legal proceedings. However, I think it is important that as a committee, and I think members are very keen to look at this issue, so I think to keep ourselves informed and given our interest in this, I just want to seek agreement that the committee writes to the Minister and that we seek an update, either written or orally in closed session, from DVA officials to inform ourselves of the current position of the legal proceedings. I advise members that upon receipt of this update, when the outcome of the judgment is known, all relevant papers will be circulated to members' packs to enable the committee to consider how it may wish to proceed. But in the meantime, are you content that we seek an update to see in relation to the legal proceedings?
Yes.
Content? Okay, thank you. At sorry, excuse me. Item 4 is the draft minutes. At page 7, you'll see the draft minutes of proceedings of the meeting on the 15th of January 2024. I'm seeking agreement that members are content that the minutes are true and accurate reflection of the meeting on the 15th of January 2025. If so, I will sign the minutes now. Are you content? Okay. Thank you, members. Okay, item 5 is matters arising. So firstly, in terms of the oral evidence from the Northern Ireland Environment Agency, sorry, I have a frog in my throat this morning. And for members that following the committee's meeting last week, I did write to the Committee of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs to highlight the committee's position in receiving oral evidence from NIEA. And having considered our request at its meeting on the 16th of January, the Committee for Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs wrote to the Minister supporting our request for NIEA to brief the committee as soon as practically possible, and that it was content that this can happen before the ERA committee considers a written briefing from NIEA. So they were due to have a written briefing from NIEA. It was originally to be scheduled for the 30th of January, which was postponed to the 27th of February. So the committee has undertaken to forward a copy of the response to our committee once it's received. So I'm seeking agreement or views that the clerk now does go to seek potential dates for NIEA and NI Water to provide oral evidence on that basis. Is content?
Yeah, content.
I suppose just to put on record our thanks to the Agriculture Committee as well for working with us on this aspect, because we've highlighted it a number of times. It's really important for us to drill down into the policy issues relating to the capacity and where those have arisen from. Keith, you were indicating there.
Are we planning still to have the two in the same day?
I think the plan is, yes, to have them
Because at least
on
it's
the
fresh
same
in our
day.
mind if it's the same day. That's fair enough.
So they can't come in together.
Fair enough, yeah.
And as you remember, we did submit the broad themes that we would like to discuss, not the questions, the broad themes, so that they were aware and under no illusion what we would be looking into. But they will be on the same day.
Thank you.
Cahill?
Just now, Madam, because I believe that NIW is meeting all the committees, briefings. So if there's any notes or any information coming back for them, it may be relevant to what we're doing, but if there is, by the time we meet them, could we just check with all the committees to see if any discussions been in just NIW or NIEA, just that would be relevant to us.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point. Thank you. Yeah, in case there's anything different that hasn't come up. Yeah, no, that's fair enough. Okay, any other matters arising from, Peter?
Just off the back of the last committee meeting with DFI and I raised about taxis and bus lanes, and one of the officials, and I'm not questioning the official, has suggested that there was a consultation that had been launched earlier that week, I think was the language that he used, but from speaking to people it was the day before, and I do get the impression that it was kind of hidden away in the consultation section of the DFI website. You'll note that in the last week there was a Living with Water consultation document in Derry that was in our packs. I don't think it's come through any of our packs, so can maybe go back and find out as to why it seems to have been announced quite quietly. And maybe even for you, Chair, I'm not sure how this normally works with consultations in committee packs. Should we normally be told of every consultation that should come through here? Because having looked through the committee packs, I haven't seen this particular one.
Yeah. No, I think it's an important thing just to raise, just to see where that went. As well, it was over the Christmas period too, not to excuse that fact, because that shouldn't be an excuse. We should be aware of what's coming out, and because of the huge amount of public interest, particularly as well whenever this is linked to the traffic issue, that is happening in Belfast city centre.
It's also a very short window. It's 22 days for the consultation. I think that's as short as you can make it as well.
Yeah.
So I just think there's a couple of questions there.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. So are members content with that? Yeah. Okay, thank you. Also, just to say, last week we obviously in relation to the Boyne Bridge, which had a huge amount of media coverage on it last week, we have asked TransLink to come to the committee, so you'll see that in the forward work programme. So that has been requested, that we can take a look into how we have arrived at where we are at in relation to it and get some clarity around the hows and why of that situation. So that's in there as well, just to raise that at this juncture, because some of that is all connected as well. So okay, we'll move on if members are content. So item 6 is correspondence. At page 20 you'll see the correspondence memo. And At page 26, correspondence from a member of the public regarding yellow traffic boxes in Belfast. I'm seeking agreement to write to the individual advising that the committee does not deal with individual cases and that he may wish to write to the Department for Infrastructure for a response to the issues raised. Agreed.
Agreed.
At page 27, correspondence from a member of the public regarding the Northern Ireland Planning Portal. Again, I'm seeking agreement to write to the individual advising that the committee does not deal with individual cases and he may wish to write to the Department for Infrastructure for a response to the issues raised. Agreed? Okay, thank you. Have you any comment or want to raise any other issue of items in the correspondence in the meeting pack? Any other items?
A wider topic of conversation just pertaining to planning. Can I bring it in regards to the planning portal, or should I bring that in maybe under AOB towards the end?
I think it might be worthwhile bringing it in under AOB,
AOB?
if you want to do it in there. Is that okay? Thanks, Peter. Okay, and then I'm seeking agreement that members are content to note the remaining correspondence as contained in the correspondence memo in the meeting pack. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, then at pages 4, 7 and 16 of the tabled items, correspondence memo with budget fact sheet and roadmap for the budget improvement plan. Advise members that the Committee for Infrastructure has provided some information in terms of its work for the forthcoming budget for 2025-26 financial year. So just want to, if you don't mind, briefly remind members of the process. So once a draft budget has been agreed by the Assembly and the Executive, legislative authority is required through a budget bill to permit departments to incur expenditure in the first few months of the financial year. Prior to the scrutiny of the budget bill, the Assembly will consider the spring supplementary estimates, which will reconcile all of the changes arising in the course of the financial year 2024-25 from the in-year monitoring rounds. This will be followed by the vote on account, which will enable departments to draw down approximately 45% of the voted resource during the first few months of the next financial year 25-26. Whilst the budget is out for consultation, the timing for the associated SSEs and vote on account and budget bill will be subject to tight timescales. Therefore, the committee may wish to consider scheduling oral evidence, and I think it would be important to do this from DFI on its spending requirements for 2025-26, including how any spending will be prioritised if this is not met. Because I did think it was very interesting whenever you look at the draft in terms of the price per head of population. I find that fascinating in terms of the different departments for both resource and capital, and obviously this department is quite capital intensive with the work that needs to be done, and we're all aware of that. So members, I'm just seeking agreement to schedule oral evidence in the coming weeks from the Department for Infrastructure on its requirements for the draft budget for 2025-26. Are you content with that?
Right.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so January monitoring round. Now this is interesting. So page 17 of the tabled items, you'll see the written ministerial statement on the January monitoring round Minister of Finance. I remind members that obviously at last week's meeting the committee did receive the oral evidence from DFI on its submission for the January monitoring round. Following consideration of the January monitoring round by the Executive, the Finance Minister led a written ministerial statement on Thursday the 16th of January. Okay, so something then arising from the evidence last week as well is that in our papers last week, DFI submitted bids totalling 17.4 million in resource. And the statement and the accompanying tables specify that DFI submitted bids of 22.6 million. So the accompanying slides were subsequently circulated to members after the meeting, making a passing reference that it excludes Bear Scotland holiday pay, but there was no reference to it in the written paper or in the course of the oral evidence. So in addition, the DFI stated that it had reduced capital ring-fenced requirements totalling 12 million, and was seeking approval from DOF Executive to reclassify this as general allocation or general capital. The written ministerial statement does not refer to this reclassification, but confirms that DFI received a general allocation of 13.6 million. So, considering the previously stated capital overcommitment of 12 million against the actual allocation, which is 13.6 million, I think it would be appropriate that we write to the department to clarify how this allocation will be used, to see how it will manage, obviously, the overcommitment. So this will only leave 1.6 million from the 13.6 million general allocation, and the impact on the other inescapable pressures, which were highlighted by the department, were defined as inescapable. So we've got the 5 million for TransLink, which they've highlighted with Belfast Transport Hub, and 3 million TransLink and zero emission buses. So, as I said, I think it's important that we do seek some clarity in relation to those points, and get an urgent response, because we're going to be looking at this fairly soon. It's going to be coming up in the chamber fairly soon. So the points just to seek an urgent response from DFI on is: number one, its assessment of the circumstances that leads it to believe that the bare judgment on holiday pay will be crystallised during this financial year. Secondly, why this was omitted from the department's list of bids submitted for the January monitoring round. Thirdly, how the allocation of 13.6 million capital will be used to manage the identified pressures. And lastly, what impact will this have on the other inescapable areas of spend as highlighted in the department's briefing paper, and therefore is there any risk of overspend on any of these areas? So there's 4 points there. Was there anything else that members had spotted or noted, or any comments that they want to make? No, content with that?
Enough.
Okay, thank you. Okay, item 7, now we're moving to our oral evidence session. So we're going to be looking at the review of residence parking. At page 29, you'll see the clerk's memo review of residence parking. At page 32, you'll see residence parking review, Department for Infrastructure, written evidence. So we're welcoming to the committee today David Porter, Director of Engineering, Stephen Hughes, Head of Engineering Policy, and Laura Irvine, Head of Transport Policy. I think this is your first time up at the Committee for Infrastructure, so in terms of this session. So you're very welcome to the committee, and we appreciate your time with us today. Members, I'm just seeking agreement that the evidence is recorded by Hansard. Are you content? Yep. Okay, so thank you for joining us today. We do obviously have the written evidence, and we have the report, which I find really, really interesting. So if you don't mind, if you just have a brief 5 minutes, just to introduce what you're up for today, and then we'll come to members' questions. So.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Committee, for the opportunity to come and talk about residence parking. So, as has been said, you have the report. It's taken some time for us to produce this because it is a complex issue, and in many respects it strikes to the heart of the ownership or the place that the road in front of a house plays in society. And in some cases it's quite clear, you know, the likes of the strategic road network, it's very clear the role that the M1 plays, and nobody would question that. Equally, in terms of our city centre streets, there tends to be a less of an issue. They're very clear in terms of their purpose, but there's a space in between those two where it's less clear the purpose of that road. And it is very clear that those people that own properties, and particularly residential properties in front of that, feel that sense of ownership of that space in front of them. And in some cases that then boils over and causes particular problems. As a department, we can react to that in different ways. So we can introduce traffic regulations to control the use of that. So, for example, you can put in a 2-hour or 4-hour waiting, and in some ways that deals with it. But there are other very residential areas and very residential streets, particularly in urban areas, where you get traffic using that in order not to either be caught up in the traffic regulations or not to pay for the provision that's there. And in that case, that type of parking becomes a bit of a nuisance, and particularly for those people that have residential areas. So it's really that nuisance parking that is really, I think, at the heart of this. In order to address this, the department did introduce a policy back in 2017, and there have been many attempts, in fact 9 attempts, to try and introduce residence parking schemes here. Only one of which we've actually managed to get on the ground. And the review report doesn't just focus on the success, it looks at all the other 9, and then it also widens out our consideration to see what others have done, to see, is the problem with our policy, is the problem with our approach, and how can we actually then make this a little bit better so that we can actually deal with that nuisance element of parking. In terms of the policy, the report concludes that the policy is okay. It's broadly similar to what others do, and therefore it seems to be okay in terms of the policy. And the scheme that we have got on the ground is welcomed by residents. It does seem to address that issue of nuisance parking when we actually get schemes delivered. The difficulty is in terms of the process. So the schemes are very, very labour intensive in order to design the scheme and actually to implement it. And that engagement with communities is very, very labour intensive. And you get this sense as we go through that, whenever you look at some of the examples where we had consensus built and further work was done, and you kick it on to the next stage, and you have that hope that you're actually going to get it across the line, and then at subsequent stages in the development of the scheme, either because of the design elements or because of the consensus required, then officials are then frustrated that we can't actually get it on the ground, and it becomes then, in some cases, quite a contentious issue where we're dragged into particular issues. And in that situation, the approach to date has just been to back off some of those schemes. So the report tries to set out a context looking forward where we can actually make this process a little bit easier. And in particular, it uses the words inform, explain, and reassure. So rather than this perpetual process of redesign, trying to deal with every single possible query that we might have or every single possible issue that we might have in order that we get consensus, the Minister is very keen for us to inform and then explain the rationale for that, to give that reassurance that this is okay, and then to push on. And that slight change of approach as opposed to this perpetual trying to work towards ultimate acceptance, that we need to be slightly more robust in our approach. The context for that robustness is very, very important. So this is not a recommendation for dictatorship. That it needs to sit within the context of the transport strategy and the transport plans. And so the transport plans will set out a vision for how our individual towns and cities will work. And within that, the context of parking and residence parking could be defined. So you could have a transport plan for Belfast. It could say, in these large areas, these are residential areas, and we're going to limit the parking in these areas, and therefore we're going to bring forward residence parking. And that sets that overall context. Now, I think we do need to be careful whenever, because the example in my head anyway is nice and clean and tidy whenever we're talking about Belfast, or certainly inner Belfast, the city centre area. It is very clear this is the commercial core. There are very easily identifiable areas where there are residential areas. You can quite clearly see where the nuisance element of parking could exist, and you can quite clearly see very significant facilities which attract people, the likes of Queen's University. So it's very easy in the context of Belfast to say, this is how we would like the city to develop. Here's the context of parking, and here's how residence parking fits in that. It's less clear whenever you go into some of our rural towns, and the one example in my mind is Ballymoney, where we have had a request for a residence parking scheme, it's less clear how you can say. So yes, you can identify the core of the main street in Ballymoney. That's the easy bit. But in terms actually of the nuisance bit and where you would draw a line, because what you don't want to do with residence parking is just displace the problem. So whenever you do them on a small scale, probably like of the scale that we have done at behind Queen's and Rugby Road. Now it was a pilot project just to test the process. But in reality, what that has done is basically just displaced the problem. You have moved those cars from parking in Rugby Road and in that area to the adjacent streets. So you could end up then having to have another residence parking and another residence parking. And that's where that strategic context is all important for the likes of Belfast. So it's more challenging then whenever we go into our rural towns about that we're not just solving one problem and making this group of residents more content because they have a residence parking scheme, but actually we've just displaced the problem. And so therefore that scale is important. So getting to the core of what is actually the problem that we're trying to solve and what actually is the solution. So going forward then, the report commits in the interim to continuing with the two schemes that are already started. So that's one in Belfast and one in Derry, Londonderry. And then also looking at the emerging problems that we see in and around the new University of Ulster campus in Belfast, and also the McGee campus. So that is what is sort of the to-do list as defined within the report. And then there's a team set up to look at where else are there justifiable schemes out of the long list of those that have been requested, which ones of those are viable, which ones of those are likely to gain consensus, and which ones will actually deal with some of the nuisance parking that we see.
Okay.
So with that, I shall pause. I'm happy enough to answer any questions.
Great, thank you. It does seem quite a niche area to look at, but it is really important when we're looking at nuisance parking, particularly in relation to those who are disabled and their ability to be able to move about on pavements and that type of thing as well, and also from a traffic point of view and traffic management, which we're all very much aware of at this moment in time. So thank you for that information. I just wanted to follow on from your points there in relation to, you were saying, well, first of all, I just wanted to pick up on a point of clarity. You had said that the policy was introduced in 2017 and it's 2007.
2017?
No, it's 2007.
Sorry, 2007.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick that up just as a matter of clarity to just, because I'll come back to that in a moment.
It's my notes, apologies. Yeah,
no problem. But I'll come back to that in a wee moment, but I wanted to pick up on your point in relation to scoping out areas and finding areas and the criteria that is needed in terms of baseline to go, yes, this is an area where we could maybe intervene for residence parking, because what I might see as nuisance parking in an area that I'm working in may not be a nuisance parking to somebody else. It can be quite subjective given what could be happening outside your front door. So what is the baseline criteria that you're looking at whenever, say, elected representatives or residents are coming to the department saying we have a problem here?
Yeah, no problem. So we've established a new team to look at that. So looking at the outcomes of the review in terms of the simplification of the process, but then also how we as a department sort of assess requests. So obviously we have the areas where strategically they have been identified, whether through transport plans, through schemes such as BRT, but then there's also a significant level of interest in schemes from across Northern Ireland from residents and elected representatives. What we are doing at the moment is considering what that minimum criteria could look like. Mm-hmm. We want to ensure that any process is fair. We want to ensure that, as David had said previously, it's scalable, so we're not addressing something in one area and potentially causing an issue somewhere else. We also have limited resources, so we need to figure out a way as well to ensure that we prioritise schemes and do so in a way that's fair, but also achieves value for money for the department. So that's something that we're actively looking at the moment and taking forward as a priority.
Mm-hmm. And
you'll be also looking at, obviously we'll be doing parking surveys, to identify that the problem is coming from, people from outside the area,
okay.
so that's where you get into the labour intensive element of this. You're starting from an early point in the morning and then serving the whole day to make sure that you're actually picking up that the cars causing the problem are from outside the area. So there's criteria within the policy in terms of what constitutes a problem in terms of residence parking.
And that's a similar type of approach that we use for our assessment for accessible or disabled parking bays. It's the same type of traffic survey that we do just to establish whether there actually is a traffic problem, albeit this one's more complex because you're also then worried about not just whether there's a parking problem, but actually where the cars are from.
Okay. So then in terms of that new team, when were they in place then to look at this and then assess what's coming down the track, and what is in terms of the figures? What are the figures in terms of the amount of requests that you have there, and in terms of the team that you have resource wise?
So in terms of the team, only the last few weeks.
Okay.
So we are currently looking at not just residence parking, but also issues such as inconsiderate parking linked to the pavement parking issues. At the moment, the department has approximately 230 requests across Northern Ireland for residence parking schemes, separate to the schemes that David has already mentioned. So it's a significant number. So we are trying to determine how best to assess those as quickly as possible, but doing so in a way that everyone is aware of what that will look like and how it will look like. And that's something that we're working on at the moment as a priority.
Okay, so it might be useful for the committee to have an idea of where those schemes are in terms of a cross section of Northern Ireland, urban and rural type constituencies. If you could provide that to the committee, that would be good, because 230 is quite a huge amount, and considering that the new team is only in place a matter of weeks, which brings me back to the point I was going to raise around the 2007 and the fact that we are sitting in 2025 looking at this policy is, to me, I'm just wondering why there has been such a delay in terms of looking at these schemes, reviewing them. Is it because there needed to be that length of period of time? We've heard about the resource being a problem, so just keen to understand why. Pretty much 20 years down the line.
If you go back to 2007, we've been sort of directed by the Belfast Metropolitan Transport Plan at that stage, and we were looking at schemes within the Belfast core area. There's the Markets area, Sandy Road, Donegal Pass, Brown Square, and we looked at those and we're talking to residents. And again, this all takes time. You're talking to residents, you're looking for consensus, then you're signing up schemes. Those schemes at that stage floundered because we couldn't get enough response from the areas. So, there was a bit of a cessation then. We were told go back and ask them again. So we started the engagement process again. And this doesn't, this is taking a couple of years, so you're quickly moving on. The decision after the second round of engagement was then to look at other areas, and we looked at Lower Malone, Stranmillis and Rugby Road. And taking it through the same sort of process, local engagement, designing up schemes and things like that. Again, it all takes time, and we got the consensus for the Rugby Road to go ahead. And I can't remember the figures off the top of my head, but the Rugby Road scheme itself took the guts of 5 years, I think, to implement. Because of the amount of engagement we were having to do with or to undertake with the local residents. And it was a series of, there was a whole series of redesign in that process as well. So the Rugby Road scheme came into effect around about 2018, I think. So it did. So we then reviewed it over the 2 or 3 years of the scheme being in place.
It's not that there's been no activity since the policy was introduced. Lots of activity, lots of attempts. Only one that was successful. It was brought in 2018, ran for a few years, and then that's what triggered the review to say, right, now that we actually have one on the ground, what are the lessons learned, and do we need to change the policy? Policy is okay. It's the process. It's the perpetual redesign and the chasing after the consensus or building that consensus that is our issue.
So 2018 then is 11 years down the line from the start. So, and look, I've read it there, and it has been positive from the residents' feedback. So in the other schemes that you're looking at in terms of 230, do you expect that the process will be easier from this long review in relation to how those schemes have went, so the learning from the department? So I'm also thinking of the technological change that there has been since 2007. So do you envisage that it will be easier to get these schemes rolled out from the learning now that you have in terms of that engagement, which could be less intensive in terms of resource?
It simply has to be, because we don't have the capacity and the resource to chase schemes which we don't have a high degree of certainty are going to get across the line. And so either we make the process at the start of establishing whether there's consensus more straightforward, and that's an on-off switch, or we streamline the process as we go through that. And that's where the Minister has said, inform, explain and reassure. So let's arrive at the right solution, or what we believe is the right solution. Let's have that consultation. Let's make small tweaks where possible, and then let's commit to that and actually get it on the ground, as opposed to continually refining and refining and refining. Because the other thing that all those refining processes do, they don't make the scheme any cheaper or easier. And that's the other thing that we may well, if we're serious about seeing this as a way of changing people's behaviour to the dominance of private cars in our towns and cities, we need to actually get some more of these on the ground. They need to become a more established thing, that people recognise that it is not okay just to drive into every city centre or town centre and assume that you're going to be allowed to park, that there needs to be more constraint in order for people to make different choices, more sustainable choices. And this is part of this. But if, again, as I said earlier, if we do it on such a small scale, that won't affect that modal shift, because if you can't park here, you'll just go into the next street. So it needs to be that broader scale approach that this fits into, that makes it clear that we are genuine about tackling the dominance of private cars.
Okay, I'm not going to hog the rest of the time. I'm going to move to other members. Deputy Chair, do you want to come in?
Thanks very much for coming along tonight with the information. The Chair's covered some of the very key points there. I want to go into one that's potentially a bit more niche, and hopefully you'll be able to cover it. Laura, you talked about the team looking at inconsiderate parking and pavement parking and illegal parking, and I think none's more prevalent than the parking that we see outside our schools. And certainly in my constituency, I can think of about 15 or 20 examples where residents contact me on a daily basis saying they feel like hostages in their own home 4 or 5 times a day. And whether that was down to poor planning around the schools themselves when developments are built, or the fact that a lot of these schools were built before cars even existed and the infrastructure has not kept up with them. But the reality is that at certain times of the day, if an ambulance or fire engine needed to get into those areas, they wouldn't be able to get in, let alone residents finding parking. So is the team that's been set up looking at that? And what can be done to try and alleviate the problems that we see day in daily outside our schools?
So in relation to inconsiderate parking, obviously we're looking at the outcomes of the review that was undertaken a number of years ago, and the 3 options within that. So while schools aren't necessarily a specific consideration at this stage, it is something that will be looked at as part of that wider departmental approach.
Okay. Could I ask that they would be? Because I'm sure I can speak for the rest of my colleagues to say that it is chaos outside many of our schools. And we see people parking on WL lines without enforcement. We see people parking in residents' driveways. We see people parking in disabled bays. We see people double and triple parked on a main road, all just to get little Jimmy to school on time. And when it comes to us as elected reps on behalf of residents raising it, it feels like we just go around in circles. We contact the police, nothing happens. We contact DFI, nothing happens. We spend years trying to get through processes of getting wavy lines and double yellow lines in, and nothing ever seems to get sorted. And residents rightly, and this is the policy that's covering it, complain about illegal parking, inconsiderate parking, and they feel like they are just hostages, as I say, in their own homes. So I really would like to see an acknowledgement that that is a key critical problem that needs to be solved. And I appreciate it's difficult.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we would have solved it by now. But we need to acknowledge just how important it is.
I think you're right, John. The core of this as well. So we as a department can bring in legislation that says, you know, those wavy lines, they are now mandatory and you must stay off those in law. The enforcement piece is more difficult.
Exactly.
You know, it's difficult to have either somebody from the PSNI or a traffic attendant at all those schools at all those times. Plus, it's a short-term problem. It's at the drop-off and pick-up time. So by the time
It's a regular problem.
but it's a regular problem. I accept
Every
that.
day.
But it's and what you can see sometimes is the schools putting out signs and encouraging their parents to be more considerate. And we see a slight improvement and then a different year and it reverts back. I think part of this is also the message that we need to put out across the society is, look, think before you park.
Exactly.
We seem to have, in particular, both in driving and in parking, we seem to have got very selfish as a society, and we need to find a way of changing that. Now, part of it absolutely is legislation, part of it is residence parking, part of it is enforcement, part of it is school keep clears, but there's an equally large part of that is the appeal to the communities and the drivers to, for goodness sake, think about other people in your driving. Because there are things that are just impossible to enforce against because of the scale of the problem. It's so widespread that we do need to change people's attitudes, both to speeding and then also to parking as well.
I totally agree. The resource issue is a massive one. I get that the police can't be everywhere, and neither can the redcoats or your officials. But I think certainly we're dealing with 99% of the day. These people are very rational when it comes to the school run.
Yeah.
Well, everything's up for grabs, including claiming that closest spot. So potentially even an awareness campaign, potentially from the department going forward, would be something that could be useful just to continue to raise that. Maybe working with the schools and local residents. At least there will be an acknowledgement to the residents that something is trying to be done, because at the minute I think they just feel totally forgotten about and totally
So we
demoralised.
do rerun the campaign about think before you park,
Yeah.
and that's a routine campaign that's within DFI. You know, you're right. Maybe an example of in around a school would be a good thing to target at some point. So yeah, good
Okay,
point.
that was all, Chair.
Yeah,
Thank you.
because sometimes repeating the message, it loses its
Oh yeah,
it
absolutely.
loses
Yeah.
it, so it might be worth looking at that point. It's relevant. Stephen.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thanks, folks, for your presentation. I appreciate the challenges and some of the good points that have been made. I think just to say, you know, it has been talked about for so long up here, you know, coming up to 18 years since it was first introduced, 2007, to have only one fully operational, albeit progress has been made in Londonderry. You know, I suppose it is slightly disappointing, but I do appreciate the challenges around it. And, you know, the parking issues, as you know, aren't just in Belfast or Londonderry. You know, they go well beyond that right across the country. Just a couple of points, really, I suppose. How do you get the balance between businesses and residents? Obviously, it's a very delicate balance, and in our town and city centres, parking can be at a premium in some places, you know, and that is really, I suppose, the fundamental reason of having the scheme, to help residents. And it is interesting, the positive feedback from within the questionnaire there, which is good to see, and I think there is a room to roll it out further. But I suppose linking in with lessons from elsewhere, how it's done. I know there's a number of different models, but how can we get businesses maybe more on board, that they don't maybe scupper the plan for more of the residential end of things?
Well, going back again, we did engage with local authorities from elsewhere, you know, and I've been at this probably far too long. You know, was I wrote the first policy. You know, we visited Glasgow and Croydon. And Croydon at the time were sort of the top of the parking people, you know. So we took the elements that we thought were the good elements of all their policies and put it together in our own policy. So we have sought advice from elsewhere. I also talked to the folks down in Dublin as well about their approach to it, you know. So we believe, you know, the policy reflects what's good and best practice from elsewhere. In terms of the businesses are included in there. You know, they can apply for a business permit. They've been treated, you know, almost the same as a a resident. We also, the fact that, you know, we get onto the technicalities of schemes, you know, and the preference has always been for access by permit and by mixed use or pen display. And that's the, I know a lot of people don't like the pen display element of that, but that's to try and make the scheme work for everybody.
Yeah.
You know, as I keep saying to people, the plumber still has to call. So if you lock it down as permit only, you know, he has difficulty getting there, you know. So the pen display then gives them the opportunity to come in and do the work, and move on, you know. So I think maybe you're looking at the Lower Malone scheme, which where the businesses sort of scuppered that whole plan, and that was mainly the landlords. Effectively, you know, because they thought they're having difficulty with actually accessing properties, because it was a hybrid scheme with pen display and mixed use at either end, and then the core of the scheme was permit only. So that was restricting the use of that core area, and the landlords didn't like that. To be honest, we as engineers didn't like it either, but that's what the local residents wanted.
I think the balance is important. It's a bit like the on-street parking in many town cities where the free 1 hour bays generally works, keeping the high turnover going. You know, those prime spots for the retail units. But
and that's what it's for. It's for businesses. It's to keep that turnover. There are longer term parking slightly further out, or
that's
car
right,
parks and things
councils
like
have bought into that too with strategies and so on. Just then moving on in terms of locally, Bangor City Centre, as it is now, in Hollywood Town Centre, have been long lobbied about for the introduction of a scheme, and you know, it has been frustrating the length of time. Again, there obviously is a lot of businesses and residential within both of those centres, you know, within walking distance. Are they on the radar anywhere, and where are they on the radar, if anywhere?
I think they've always been they're on the list. They've always been on the list, you know.
They are one of the 230 that are.
I say list.
A local press statement going on.
No, but you know, there is real issues out there, and we're contacted about them. You know, weekday parking is a huge issue, so
very contentious.
we would encourage certainly progress on it. No, that's grand. Thanks, folks. Thanks, Chair.
I seen Mark vigorously shaking his head there in relation to whenever Londonderry was mentioned. So I think, Mark, you're next on my list.
That was Derry, sorry, Chair. But that's not why I was shaking my head. That's not why I was shaking my head.
Two different places, Chair. That's two different schemes there.
Well, I'm sure the people on the blog side would probably concur with my description of the location. But anyway, no, thanks to the team for coming in. I share the, I suppose, concern that others have aired there about the length of time that this has taken. I'm sure it's something that you as officials are looking at. You weren't all here at the start, but hopefully we see more progress with you at the helm than that has happened to date. You spoke about the importance of the Rugby Road scheme, I suppose, now being up and running, the lessons that can be learned from that, but I think it's equally, if not more important, to learn from the schemes that have been unsuccessful. And you cited the Bogside scheme there. In my constituency, which like was torpedoed, there were over 200 objections. We have to understand what those objections were, what was at the centre of them, and how can they be overcome merely by reducing the scale or ambition of the scheme, by reducing that red line. I'll just ask a couple of questions, Chair, sure, and then if the team can answer them all at the same time. I mean, that Bogside scheme that I'm talking about, there's been huge frustration in Derry and beyond. I'm sure that any other scheme or any work on any other scheme has been delayed until this nut is cracked. And I'm glad to hear that now this isn't still the case, or certainly doesn't seem to be the case, if you can confirm that or not. The expansion of the university here in the city offers tremendous opportunities, but with that growth comes inevitable friction. So I'm glad that there is now a commitment from the department to look there. The expansion of the uni is long overdue, but so is a residence parking scheme before expansion, but now the need will be more acute. Can I confirm, I suppose, and I think you've confirmed it yourself almost, David, there, that the zeal with which these schemes are now being approached are going to be approaches being driven more by climate considerations or obligations as opposed to residential amenity. The issue around displacement, that's a pretty obvious one, but is the consultation on schemes confined to within that red line, or is there consultation with those beyond the red line who will inevitably be impacted by displacement? And then I think the one thing that we definitely have all learned from the schemes, whether successful or unsuccessful, is that these things don't happen quickly. So what is DFI doing in the interim in these areas to alleviate problems? I mean, we can't just have residents waiting for a scheme that may never come. So what work is DFI doing with other partners, with PSNI, for example, around enforcement, with the Ulster University in Derry and in Belfast, and crucially with TransLink to identify potential public transport solutions, to identify new routes, and to look at, I suppose, park and ride opportunities as well.
Thank you, Mark, for asking all your questions in one go. I appreciate that. I'll let you answer.
So is the nut cracked? So we believe it is. So yes, there has definitely been a hesitancy to commit to any other schemes until we got the report published. We now have that published, and as Laura said, a team in place. Just in terms of the team, that team is transport policy. So that is going to determine the streamlining of the process and also the prioritisation. It's not just Laura and her team that then will deliver. So whenever we get it through that, here's the list, here's the ones that we think are viable, it will then go back to the traffic sections in the divisions actually to deliver. So it's not just looking at this individual team, and there has been work ongoing within the divisions receiving the long list of requests that have been there. So that bit hasn't stopped, and there has been some thinking done within the divisions in terms of whether this is a good location or not, which will help inform the work of Laura and her team. In terms of the climate question, Mark, everything that we do within DFI, in fact, everything that we do within departments needs that climate lens on it as well. So it is it's not our main driver, it's not our only driver, but it is definitely a very central plank in the argument of this. If we are going to achieve the reductions in emissions, we need to change our behaviours. Part of that is changing the fuels that our vehicles run on, but an equally important part of that is actually trying to minimise the number of journeys we have, and parking constraint and demand constraint is part and parcel of that. Now, we need to be very careful that we don't be too brutal. You know, we need to recognise that moving around is part and parcel of our economy. That's the way that economic activity and social activity takes place. So we do need to find those, as you rightly say, those other routes, whether it's through TransLink, and making the public transport offer more attractive, more reliable as well will be part and parcel of that. In terms of the red line consultation, particularly in our cities, I see that the transport plans are particularly important. So rather than just having consultation on the individual streets that we're going to constrain, the transport plan about how Belfast or how Derry, Londonderry is actually going to work, and which areas are going to be targeted for the likes of these interventions is actually to me the bigger and most important bit of that, because that sets that into context in exactly the same way as area plans or local development plans set out where our development is going to be. And so at a strategic level or at an arm's length level, you can look at a particular settlement and you can work out where development is going to be. And then the development control process is just working out the detail of what has already been established. So it's the same type of approach, set out the strategic approach within those transport plans, and then I think that should ease some of the issues in terms of the specific consultation, because if you can point to this has already been accepted in the transport plan for a particular settlement and now we're just worried about the detail, it changes the type of the conversation. And then your last point just about PSNI enforcement and TransLink and other solutions. Like, I can't give you an answer that says the whole of the department is focused on always looking for other solutions. And as I said, trying to shift people away from private cars. Part of that solution is by enforcement, whether that's through TAs or PSNI. Part of that solution is by making public transport more accessible, more attractive, more affordable. All those things come together as our way of actually making this work. So absolutely, we are looking for those. I can't give you examples of specifically where where we can say we have introduced a bus because of the non-delivery of a residence parking scheme. I can't go into that level of detail, but in terms of actually the approach of the department, you're absolutely right. It's not just constraint on parking, it's constraint on parking and providing an alternative that will actually make this thing work.
Okay,
thank you, David. You've some actually kind of chicken and egg scenarios I'm thinking of, and not far from my office here beside Ulster University campus.
Mark, sorry.
No.
If you're going to go into another speech about your area, I'm going to cut you off because we've got questions here from other people and we need to come to them as well.
It was just going to be an example, Chair, where TransLink can't come into the area or refuse to run a service in the area because it's overrun with parked cars. So DFI in the interim need to look at other measures like increased double yellow lines and enforcement to keep that area clear so a service can be delivered to reduce the dependence on cars.
Yep. Okay, thank you. Cahill?
Thanks, Chair. And I'll run through it very quickly, Chair. Thanks very much for your presentation. Just quickly, I mean, is the premise of the resident parking still the same as it was when it was introduced? The idea behind people accessing the houses and all the frustration. Obviously, we've learned a lot of things about it now in terms of traffic movement and congestion, all those things. That's my first question. The second one is it to the house or the individual? Is it the resident, does it pass on? Is it the resident has to say they're applying for the permit, or does it go with the individual property? The other thing too I wanted to mention is the healthcare permit. Have you considered, I'm only saying, the way you have individual disabled boxes, is the case of how they move about, is it a case of maybe identifying that area? Because we're encouraging more care at home nowadays and those numbers are growing, and it's just how you identify, how that's rolled out, and maybe consideration of marking a box say outside if you identify a person needs that care package. And then, Chair, my final point was in relation to you were saying about Stephen, engaging with people. Is that individual letters or communication with each house, or do you say, right, we're going to target this area, bring them all into local community office, or engage with council, say let's have them all in the one room, let's have a proper chat, do a presentation, or what way do you do that? Because that might be a better, I'm not saying you don't do that, but that might be a way, of engaging with local residents. But just, that's it, Chair. That's as quickly as I can go with the questions.
I'll deal with two of those and then I'll ask you to deal with the permit. So in terms of the basis of the scheme, you're right, it hasn't changed. What we do need to change is just streamline the process so we actually get them across the line a wee bit quicker. And in terms of engagement, all manner of approaches have been taken, individual approaches, site meetings, sort of almost like town hall type meetings as well. It does say in the report that the elected representatives play an important role in this, and I think that is absolutely key. If in order to get schemes across the line, if a local representative, elected representative, championed that scheme, made sure that they had the consensus, got the businesses on board, that would definitely help the chances of a scheme and give us reassurance that actually this is worthy of putting our limited resource into. So again, that was included in the report on purpose, because this can't just be department work harder at this. That's not the answer. We tried 9, we've got one across the thing. Working harder, we'll be coming back in 10 years saying we've tried another 9 and we've got another one across the way. Something needs to change here, and I think elected representatives play a part in that.
Just quickly, Chair, all the whoever's has a say in it should be involved, be it local authority, certainly elected reps, but if it's housing, I don't know who it is, who it may be, but all those people involved should be invited into the room. Yeah.
And so can you deal with the permit?
The permit is for the resident who has a car. The initial permit, they need to have a car. to qualify. They're also eligible for visitors permits, so it's 25 per quarter and double that for over 60s, I think it was. The healthcare permits seems to work fairly well. You know, it's I can't recall whether it was a proactive. We went out to the local health authorities or they came to us in terms of issuing permits. But if you see the numbers, there's quite a few. There's quite a few number of health permits, and most of those are for the cares, the daily cares. You know, and it's a great benefit to them because previously they'd have spent a lot of their time driving around the streets looking for a car parking space or running the gauntlet of parking in a corner. Now they're actually getting into the area and parking it, you know, outside the property almost, you know. So that's included in the policy as it is.
Okay, thank you. Andrew?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for coming, and thank you for also opening up the debate just outside of the Belfast area. I think it's really important, as you say, Chair, those 230, 240 other schemes. I think that will help inform us. I suppose really, it's like all these things, you think you have a question scribbled down, then you hear some of your answers, then you sort of start scribbling different questions. But I'll try and go back. I mean, what schemes do you see were actual? Because the big thing is behaviour as much as anything, you know. So I mean, and you referenced crowding in London. Like, what schemes do you see the highest change of behaviour, or what systems do you see the highest changes of behaviour? If that makes sense, because it needs to be sometimes bespoke, and that's what leads into the next question. You mentioned about championing. You know, you have to have elected reps championing the scheme, but I suppose with the greatest respect, nearly throw it back, you need to be the right scheme in some regards too, because again, you know, might be a brave elected representative to champion some of the schemes, if that makes sense. And then, which then leads into the next question is, like, you know, is there scope for, dare I say it, maybe a terrible term, but a graduated response in some ways of these, you know, so you'd start with a scheme, but then see it change and evolve as people buy in and see the benefits of it, because again, it is, it's businesses, it's workers, it's residents, it's, you know, there's the whole, someone's been involved in local politics, you know, it's a very
road politics.
I tell you what, the car park politics, you know, but anyway, sorry, Chair,
Thank you.
So in terms of the success of a scheme, it depends on what angle you're looking at it from in terms of how you measure that success. So the feedback from the Rugby Road scheme from the residents shows that is a success. You know, they welcome that. They feel that they have got the space in front of their properties back into their control, and therefore that's a success. But there's a different perspective to look at that as well from the people that want to park elsewhere and that displacement piece. So it's probably tricky to say here is a glowing example of success, because there's different perspectives on it. And whenever you talk then about that graduated response, that's exactly what we do. You know, parking issues and indeed traffic issues for the department, it is literally whack-a-mole. You know, this is not we're going to come and here's the solution. And by the way, whenever we implement that solution, we're not going to talk about this ever again, because that's it sorted. That's not the reality of managing a transport network. It is a continually evolving thing as development happens, as towns and cities grow, as businesses open and close, as factories open and close, and investment comes in, the road network and the demands placed on it are constantly evolving. And so the graduated approach that you mentioned is exactly what we try to do. We look at a particular area, and particularly our traffic teams in the divisions, they look at a particular area, they see whether it is operating okay, whether they maybe need to introduce some sort of traffic regulation to limit the amount of time. Their next tool is then to maybe put in a pay and display, introduce a CPZ in order to get more control of that. And the next tool in their box may well be, you know, the likes of residence parking, where you permit some people into certain areas. But it is a constantly evolving thing that we just need to work constantly at all times at the road network, because it's not a case of we've got the solution, we'll implement it, and that's it all sorted.
We were talking about the success there. You know, I live in Lisburn, so in terms of when they introduced pay and display, you know, a lot of the businesses weren't particularly happy with it because they thought a lot of parking had gone. But as a resident of Lisburn, all of a sudden I was able to go into Lisburn and go and get my hair cut.
Yeah.
You know, outside my hairdresser, you know, when I used to get my hair cut. I
didn't want to be rude and say.
I can nip in for 10 minutes all of a sudden because there's a lot of parking there, which was all day parking, and people were doing their sort of shifting their cars, you know, based on when the traffic warden was at. So there was more control of it, you know. So it was working actually better for the the businesses in the area, you know. So to me that's you know, a tangible, you know, visible.
And an example how different perspectives of success.
Yeah.
So some people could see that as draconian and I have to pay for this, and others, you know, what it frees up and provide. And it's certainly as a department, it's been open to be reviewing those approaches, that we don't just have a right, here's the answer and this is what we're going to do everywhere. You know, a CPZ, for example, isn't the right thing in every single time. You know, it needs to be a certain scale and it works in certain areas, and that CPZ or that pay and display then funds enforcement, and that the presence of redcoats, while some people don't like them, it actually makes that system work and as a healthy thing. But it's not right for everywhere, you know. So particularly whenever you go into our smaller rural towns, you know, you don't want that type of approach. But where there's particular problems, we do then need to step in, particularly where there's road safety issues or traffic progression issues.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair. Yep. Thank you.
Super, thank you. Keith?
Okay, thanks for coming along. I have 3 points I want to cover: finances, car charging and staffing. I'll get the name of your barber after, Stephen, if that's okay. With respect to finances, I'm looking at page 16, and I want to understand, I want you to give me an example. So you have a street with 10 houses each side in simple language, okay? So does one house get one space?
On the first
Design.
they don't get space to get a permit.
Sorry, well,
Yeah. You do an initial round of applicants, and there's a threshold, and everybody gets a permit. And then if there's sufficient capacity after that, we might issue a second round of permits.
If this isn't space?
Yeah.
Simple as that.
Yeah.
Okay, so how do you work that then from I'm using the word business model. So I'm looking at this year 1, year 2, and I appreciate COVID was in the middle of this. We're talking here page 16. So does these schemes broadly, if you're looking to put in new schemes, do they need to wipe their face for you to say that's a good idea or not? You with me?
Yeah.
So if there's a cost to you, does that sort of say, well, it's going to cost us a lot of money to run this scheme? It might be a good job, but it's going to cost. So how much is the income and expenditure of all this important to deliver a scheme, irrespective of where?
Good point. So the Minister has said that he would like them to be on a full cost recovery basis, and he's asked us, to, as it says in the report, to look at the cost of the permit in order to make sure that even some of those more marginal schemes are actually viable. It's not an absolute. You know, what we will do is we will model it and make assumptions at the early stage as to whether a scheme will be actually viable, and it won't be a case that in year 1 or year 2, if it materialises in a slightly different way, well then we'll just rip that out. It'll not be. There'll be a decision to bring one forward based on the projected use, and then we'll put it in. It does, as you say in those figures, you know, one of the big contributors is actually PCNs. You know, and that's very significant. Now, in some ways, that is a very worthy thing for individuals to park badly and to contribute to the public purse. That's not the purpose of it, and it's also not a stealth tax. So what we would ideally like is for people to follow the rules, and so whenever we are drawing up schemes, we be careful that we don't just then build in an utter reliance on PCNs, because what we want is our people to abide by the rules, and if people abide by the rules, well then our revenue from PCNs diminishes or disappears. Now, that's not our lived experience. The department has a healthy income from PCNs, but that the purpose of a PCN is actually to drive people's behaviour. It's not as a revenue stream for the department.
It's going to be difficult, David, if PCNs disappeared, to make this cost neutral.
Well, we will do. We did undertake a business case to work out the permit costs, and we've calculated that using, you know, the income from the permit, the income from pay and display, and an element of PCN. The Rugby Road, yes, it's a different scheme because most of those PCN income was coming from students.
Yeah.
And there was a spike sort of in September, and then mummies and daddies were paying those PCNs. We perceive, you know.
Okay, and I'll quickly finish on my 2 points. Car, charging your electric car. Where does that come into this? And any thoughts on this?
Yeah. Well,
Bring that up. Forgot about that.
yeah. So charging electric cars is a separate, so not necessarily related to residence parking. So at the minute the provision is through either you have your own off-street facility and you can charge your car, or that you can use one of the commercially available chargers. The department is currently looking at what's called a cross-pavement solutions. There are issues around some of those. So if you have cables across the public space, clearly that is a potential hazard, both from an electrical safety point of view, but also then a trip hazard. So there's a whole issue about liability that is being explored by the department. We're not alone in that. Lots of other road authorities across GB are also looking at that.
Will the same permit apply, David? So if I have a permit to park my car, and let's say there is a duct or whatever, I can then charge my car in that same space?
Not at the minute. So the two things are separate. So there's a residence parking scheme, and then there's work being done on
I appreciate they're separate, but if I had a parking, what do you call it? Not a ticket, a permit for to park my car, and then the scheme changes that I can charge it. Yeah. Is that going to be more money for me to charge my car in that same space?
Well, I don't know whether it's going to be more money, because I don't know what money is going to be the issue in terms of cross-pavement parking. But as it sits, getting a residence parking permit does not permit you to run a live electricity cable across the pavement. So those two things are separate things. I wouldn't doubt that at some point in the future we will, if we crack the nut of the cross-pavement parking, we will have to look at what's the consequence of that for residence parking schemes, but we're just not at that stage just yet.
And finally, briefly, so we're talking about delivering these schemes, okay, and obviously we can see the timeline so far to deliver them. You're talking now about moving these into traffic sections. If that happens, and I know this is no disrespect to traffic sections, I took 1.5 years to move one road sign. How are we ever going to deliver these based on staffing? To be fair, I'm not blaming individuals in the areas, but staffing within them. How are we ever going to deliver these if we move them to sections because the staff's not there?
Yeah. So there is a well publicised issue with staffing within not just this department but all departments. You know, it is a problem, but it is felt particularly acute on the operational side of DFI, where we have high degree of vacancies. We have a plan to try and recover from that. It's not just as straightforward as just saying, here's lots of posts. There is constraint on funding, and then there's also, particularly in terms of skills, our attractiveness in the market, the outside employment market, certainly for the likes of chartered civil engineers, is very, very buoyant at the minute. So it's not straightforward, but we're doing what we can do to that. The other point I would make is if priority is given to things within the department, they are delivered. And the example that I would point to are the part-time 20 mile hours at schools. So that was made at a ministerial and departmental priority, and there was 216 of those delivered over a 2-year period. You know, so whenever the department focuses on something that is important and wants to move it, it can do that. And I do accept that is at the expense of other things, but that's life.
The moving of a sign, David.
Yeah.
That could have been maybe one of the reasons why your sign took so long to move.
Yeah.
Okay.
But look, that's just life. The department is constantly prioritising, and it does the things that it thinks it's going to have the biggest impact, and it prioritises that, and it has to do that quite brutally at the minute, just because of the resource level and the constraint that we're under. But look, you'll hear the same from every single department.
Well, thanks. Thank you.
Okay, I want to let Peter come in because Peter's been waiting.
Minor point. Do you want to come in, Carl?
Just a minor point, because see in terms of the PCNs, because the chair mentioned about getting the match. Where are we now in terms of the percentage from just the PCNs across the PCNs? What percentage wise? Where are we now in terms of? collecting PCNs in relation to parking?
Of collecting them.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't have the figure.
I mean, I see you made some substantial progress down there in year 1, 2 and 3. So
why
could
specifically?
you give us
Specifically in terms of this.
We don't have those figures with us, but we can provide
We
it.
can
Yeah.
get that. We can
Good
get you
to
an
see how
up-to-date figure. Yeah.
it's about getting the message out.
Yeah.
You know, obviously you pay for the scheme. So
Yeah.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah.
Super, thank you. Peter?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you everyone for coming in today. Looking through the pack, I noted that it said that Dublin has had 988 residence parking schemes since 1998. Obviously, we've had one since the policy was introduced in 2007, and by my very quick GCSE maths, that's about 481 schemes to 1 up here. Do you have any figures for the other councils that are mentioned in the pack? Something in Liverpool, Gloucestershire. You know, is the disparity as big there, or is it something similar?
Don't have those figures, Peter. The thing, I think the difference is the approach. It, you know, talking to these people, talking to these other local authorities, it seems to be a fairly brutal approach in terms of it's a take it or leave it scenario. So they don't get into that continual redesign and re-engagement. You know, with residents. You know, so the present the scheme and saying, listen, this is what we're proposing to put in. Do you want it or not? You know, they might look at the odd moving of a sign or shifting of a bay, but beyond that they don't. And that was made clear to us when we went to Croydon and Glasgow. You know, they did point that out to us. You know, the fact that if we did get into that level of engagement with residents, we'll never get a scheme delivered. And unfortunately, that has proved to be true, to be honest. And it's that balance between you know we want to engage, we want to inform people, you know, but we just find we've been hamstrung, you know, in terms of delivery.
Yeah. I suppose it links into my next question. The term consensus has come up quite a lot today, and I try to rationalise it in my head about the glider in East Belfast, East Belfast MLA. If there was full consensus of absolutely everybody for that glider route, it never would have happened. Yeah. I remember the signs going up. They were very critical, we'll put it that way, but very diplomatically in terms of language, about the glider. Now that it's in, everyone loves it. Actually, in terms of the comment you made earlier, Stephen, about Lisburn and the parking issues in terms of the haircut, I think it was something like that.
You just had to get that in. Sorry,
what's the third but time? You know, people didn't like it, and then it comes in, and I actually realise it's not that big a deal. Yeah. So I think about where I get my haircut. I actually, if I went along for an 11 o'clock appointment, I wouldn't be able to park my car in the free car park that's right across the road from the barbers, because it's rammed full of people, because it's free. So sometimes I think you have to take those difficult decisions. I suppose is the point that I'm making. But what is consensus for the department? Like, what do you take as consensus? Obviously in the south, they've got a very different perception of it. Up here, I think we seem a little bit conservative. So what would our definition of consensus actually be?
This is in the report.
Not off the top of my head.
I can cover that. So in terms of sort of that initial consultation process and survey and looking at the area, you're looking at a consensus of about 22% initially. Okay. So in favour or? In favour.
It's a third of two-thirds.
A third of
two, we're looking 2/3 of residents to respond, and a third of those have to be in favour. So it's 22%. We were discussing this earlier. You know, 20% is actually quite a high response rate to any survey. So you know, people might think that that's a low percentage, but in terms of our experience of doing surveys, 20% is quite high. That only starts the process. You know, that's the initial threshold to get in. Then you go on through the detailed design. We do public engagement sessions normally, local halls and things like that, and explain it. The next step then is the formal notice of intention for the order, and then that's a 21-day period where people can raise objection to the order, and it's that point where
And that's what Scuppers is giving, and that's back to my point earlier. The role of an elected representative. So if an elected representative could champion the scheme, could corral the objectors, could explain the scheme and help us as part of that, it will then make the process that wee bit easier, because what we don't want to do is think that we have consensus through the design stage and then go out to an order and then get a massive opposition, because that's just a waste of resource, and resource, as I've said, is very, very precious at the minute, and so we need to be allocating that to schemes that we can actually have a high degree of certainty are actually going to land and be welcomed. But I do take your point, not welcome maybe is the wrong word, but solve the problem or contribute to the change of people's behaviour, because you're right, not everybody will see it as a positive thing, but if we can get them in and if we can get more of them, I think it will become more normalised, that people understand I can't just drive to a town or a city and expect to park as convenient as I once did, because we want to make it more difficult, because we want you to change your behaviour, either to not make that journey or to make it by a more sustainable means. And for those that do or have to use a car, we don't want to make it impossible, but it can't be as easy as it was in the past.
I suppose trying to rationalise this in my head, I'm thinking about Rugby Road, which I would go to quite a lot now. I would drive to it if I've got meetings in that immediate area. And before, I was used to panic a little bit. I'm not the best parker in the world. I think everyone knows that.
Sorry, Peter, I'm going to be exactly like Mark and be
no,
fair.
Yeah,
you know,
I'll
just keep it.
I'm getting to the point. So, but in terms of Rugby Road, it feels like a no-brainer to me. I mean, before I used to panic about being able to park there. Now I go over, I'm able to park, I'm able to move on. I'm happy to pay a little bit of money. Yeah. There's not that many businesses along there. I know that there's plenty of residential properties that they've been crying for years. Looking back at that example, what was the resistance there for it to take as long as it did to bring that in?
I think from our perception, or from what we think, is that people don't know what they're getting in a lot of respects. You know, you talked about Dublin and the other areas. You know, once you get a few schemes on the ground, people see what's being presented, what's ahead of them. Mm-hmm. They'll be more accepting of it. I think here there's a lack of understanding of what they're actually physically getting. Although you have to balance that against it. If they've got huge parking problems now, you'd think to be voting for it, you know, straight away, you know. But the Bogside area, I think that was one person sort of raising an issue in terms of
and encourage others then to so that's the challenge we have.
I'll be kind, I'll listen to you, Chair. It's okay, I'll leave my last question. It's all right.
You can maybe follow up as well, and we might follow up just on some of the points, but we do appreciate you coming to committee today, because these are very contentious issues in terms of parking outside people's homes, and it does cause an awful lot of stress to residents. Just some of the points that I had noted there in terms of the conversation, and maybe points to note for yourselves as well, is that EV charging issue, because obviously we have passed the VET scheme, so you know there needs to be some joint up thinking there in relation to how that will fit in for residents who have purchased EV cars. So that might also be something to look at in terms of the 230 odd parking schemes that are in the system right now, and the new team that's in place. It's just, very quickly, if you can speak to this, are they reviewing those right now? Because behaviour may have changed in those areas over a piece of time. Those might be in for a period of 10 years already. So are they reviewing them to take any out of the system to sort of free up that number? In relation to, like, I know in my own area there's transport plans happening at the minute, so if there's some in my area right now, they're not going to get moving until that transport plan's sorted out. So very briefly, if you could.
I think to do it fairly, we would need something in place to help us prioritise as a department. You know, pulling out certain ones at the moment, whilst they may have align with certain strategic objectives, they may not be the most impactful for the residents in that area necessarily, or potentially address their issues. So I don't think necessarily there's ones that we could pull out. I don't think it would be fair, but it's definitely.
They will be reviewed.
But they will be reviewed.
Yeah.
Okay.
And prioritised.
Okay. And then in terms of engagement with other agencies, obviously key, and the awareness campaign point, which I think is valid as well in terms of looking at that, in terms of that behaviour piece. And the last thing that I just noted was in terms of the full cost recovery of schemes. And there may actually be a disparity then for people depending upon where they live and the population that's on their road. Yeah. In terms of how much their permit and things will cost as well. So are you looking at that? Because that might be an issue, particularly when you're looking at areas of economic deprivation.
In areas of NRA, there's no charge for the permits, so there'll be no income from permits. But we also have to balance that with there's potentially areas where pay-and displays wouldn't work because there is free parking near that town or that area. So that's something that will be looked at on a case-by-case basis because one size does not fit all in relation to this.
Okay. Look, thank you very much. We appreciate your time today. We do. It is an interesting one. So thank you.
You'll not say that again.
I'll go to the DIY store next time. So
number one all round, you're okay. Polish, 100%.
Watch it back, it's about 40 minutes in.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, members. Peter, was there something that you wanted to follow up on maybe because you didn't get asked on the question there? Was there something you wanted to follow up?
No, it was more of a comment. I'll
okay, that's grand. Members, okay? Yeah.
I was going to ask, well, I don't ask, it'd be good to get a quick understanding of how that's, say for example, Rugby Road, how that starts, say Moultrie Street, Cookstown, for example, or any street, how that process starts and the timeline to complete it.
Yes, so
a simple layman's or layperson's guide to a quick timeline.
Follow up on just if they could break it down a timeline for that particular scheme.
No, any scheme.
Well,
so say somebody.
Well, the Rugby Road one might be. Sorry to interrupt you. The Rugby Road one might be a good one just because it was, I suppose, successful.
It's to understand, what is the delays, and I think you talked on Peter about the whole. Here's just people. There's too much communication. And Johnny will say no in the street and you're getting nowhere. Yeah. It's like speed bumps on a road. These speed bumps is the same principle. And I know you have to consult, but it gets to the point, the tail wags the dog and you get nothing done, and that's the evidence there.
Well, I find the point that he said about, I was going to say land agents because I'm thinking of the next thing, the landlords. Whenever he was talking about the landlords don't live there 24/7. So, whilst I respect the point that landlords need access to the home that they own, landlords aren't living there 24/7. So how have they been able to have such a say?
That's why I asked the question, was it the house or was it the... Yeah. Because it's interesting to say, how can you say they don't know what they're getting when the resident applies for a permit?
Yeah.
If I was a resident, I applied for a permit, I'm applying for a permit to park outside my house. So in some of the answers, so there's a wee bit of explanation. The message is not getting out right, or even if we as political reps sat in a room, all that needs to be teased out. And it seems to me, as part of the process and the delays, the right message is not getting out some way. Because you heard it here.
And to be honest, as elected reps, I take the point, it's important that as elected reps we show leadership, but there's also a point as well, we don't have the magic wand either, because residents will come around and say, well, you're not living here, you don't see it 24/7 yourself. So, I think it's important we get the milestones that the department are working to and the timelines. I think that's...
Well, it'd be interesting to find the PCNs back to see, because if you're, and I appreciate the students along the road, panicking and parking and getting in or whatever for some reason, but a few of the messages out, and it's gone on now a number of years, and there's still parking notices in a residential area, clearly defined. There's a problem in the message that...
But you could turn around and implement a police in Belfast tomorrow, but with respect, where does people park?
Yeah, well, no, we
don't have to park. I'm not saying park illegally,
but Keith, we ain't arguing that point.
But if
you drive down the street, that's clearly defined as residents parking, and if you park in there, you're going to get a ticket. Do you know what I mean? The message is not getting out. You know what I mean? Yeah. That's the way it is.
Devil's advocates. It's a successful parking scheme, and you said students there, and sort of.
Oh no,
not towards me. I'm not
what he said. That's what he said.
No, I get it. But I mean, it's a successful scheme But one scheme in 18 years is
Yeah.
not a successful
Oh, no,
policy.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely, no, and
You could argue
that's
that.
part and parcel of the message.
I've
isn't it?
parked at Rugby Road multiple times, and all the spaces are always empty. And there's plenty of public transport routes there for the students who live in. I'm very conscious it's a Belfast conversation, and only Danny and I are Belfast reps. But you've got the accommodation there for students, the clear public transport route there. There's plenty of accommodation in the immediate area of Queen's, so not that many students should be driving.
No,
to-
I'm not.
to that
I'm only
area.
going what he said. I'm not
Yeah.
faulting the students.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm
I
only saying-
understand. But I mean, in terms of that parking scheme, I mean, for as long as it is, 1 in 18 years, I mean, that's
Yeah.
No, no,
I
absolutely.
mean, you have a list of 230 sitting in a system.
yeah.
You know,
So it'd be good to get a wee time.
Yes.
You know the way if you go to do a speed bump on
Yeah.
a road, there's the process.
Yeah.
It'd be good to see what that is.
Yeah, 100%.
perfect. Right,
Also,
we.
sorry, two
sorry.
things, Chair. Parking notices came up, PCNs,
Yeah.
and he'd said, "Oh, we get a good amount of revenue through." I've met with
that's
I've met with DFI officials before, and they've kind of scoffed at it a bit and said, "Sure, it's just fired back to Westminster." So I was advised previously, this is an anecdote, that DFI don't get that direct to them. So it'd be good to get a bit of clarity in terms of how much they're getting and if they can directly spend
Right,
it.
well, and they said
Yeah.
they're going to send the figures. Let's see. Let's go.
So I
Yeah.
think we'll have that point noted
Okay.
to check in relation to that, because as well, you know, this, I was looking back just before Christmas at some of the stuff we had done, and there's also that transport bill whenever it comes as well. But all of this will help inform us whenever that
Yeah.
comes as well. Okay, members, I'm going to move on now. So we're now at item 8, which is compensation for agricultural landowners affected by construction of new roads in Northern Ireland. Ria's oral briefing. So at page 73, you'll see the Ria's paper compensation for agricultural landowners. Oh, excuse me. And we have going to welcome Des McKibben, who's a research officer for this particular paper. Sorry, excuse me. And he is joining us via online, hopefully.
Big teacher. Houston,
Just
we have a
asking,
problem.
waiting for them to admit.
I'll see you there.
No, but you know the way you said that. No, there's part.
Want me to break for a few minutes?
Some of the roads as part, and then you just
Sent a message to say, yeah.
hours and all that there. I can imagine somebody panicked and they come in on an audit 100%. It'd be interesting.
Hello,
It is now. It's well.
Des. We can't hear you. Can you hear us?
Yes, sorry about that there. Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, yes. Hello, Des. We're glad to hear you. It feels a bit like we're on Eurovision at the minute there. But look, thank you for joining the committee today. If you don't mind, we have your paper, which is quite substantial in terms of the amount of information that we have received. So if you wouldn't mind briefly taking us through it for about 5 minutes or so, I'll just see if members do want to raise any questions on it as well, Des. So I'll let you have the floor now.
No problem. Thank you, Chair. I'll just I'll run through the key points of the paper, and hopefully it can get it done within the time frame. So the committee asked Ria's to set out the definitions of development land, agricultural land, and market value in respect to the vesting process. These questions came up following the briefing from the Ulster Farmers Union on the F5 scheme on 12th of November last year. And the briefing I prepared provides an overview of the vesting process and considers how each of these specific issues are dealt with in the relevant legislation and guidance. So the vesting orders for the F5 became operative on the 25th of November last year. With this, the vesting process has begun and the landowners have received notification that their land is going to be compulsorily acquired. As part of this process, they have been issued with guidance in the form of the vesting pack directing them towards the process of making a claim for compensation. They'll have been issued with a compensation claim form as part of the pack, and compensation claim forms must be completed by the landowner or on their behalf by their agent. Land Property Service require the landowner or agent to submit a fully substantiated claim, which they will assess, and this will form the basis for any negotiations. The FA are not involved directly in this negotiation process. This is dealt with by LPS who act on their behalf. Ideally, the arrangements as set out in the guidance will result in the compensation being agreed between the LPS and the land owners agent, and both parties will be satisfied. However, this is probably something that doesn't happen too often, but that may take some resolution. But where a resolution can't be found, an agreement cannot be reached, the landowner has recourse to refer the case to the land tribunal for determination. According to the guidance documents, then compensation following a compulsory purchase of land is based on the principle of equivalence. This means in principle that the landowner should be no worse off in financial terms after the acquisition than they were before, and likewise they shouldn't be any better off. Essentially, the compensation should reflect the open market value of the land. And that was one of the key questions that the committee had: what is market value? So market value is defined by the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors in their Red Book, which sets global industry-wide standards. These standards to prescribe market value as a reflection of the highest and best use of the asset. So clearly land use is a major factor in the land value, and clearly there will be a significant difference between what is being described as development land and agricultural land, which was two of the other questions that the committee asked. So what is the difference between the two? In the simplest terms, current land use is the main factor in determining what is agricultural land and what is development land. Agricultural land is land that is currently being used for agricultural purposes, and development land is land that is either entered into the planning process or has some development potential. The terms themselves aren't defined in the guidance or legislation related to the vesting process. So the land use, the current land use, whether established or potential in the future, will have to be substantiated by the claimant whenever they're negotiating their compensation. So there is provision for land that doesn't currently have planning permission to that to be recognised. So the compensation does reflect the potential for future planning permission, and this is via the Certificate of Alternative Development. This is a similar process to applying for planning permission and involves the local planning authority determining whether the landowner, whether there would have been planning permission granted had the landowner applied before the vesting process started. This was an area that was raised during the joint meeting between yourselves and the Agricultural Committee in November, and also by the Ulster Farmers Union. The UFU highlighted the importance this certificate has for farmers in achieving the market value of the land. However, there were issues raised with the process of both getting the certificate, which is presumably an issue with the local planning authority or its application process, and how the certificate factors into the land valuation given by the LPS. I imagine the experience is very individual. However, there's no information available to me on how these processes work. I can only really recommend that the committee might want to write to LPS and DFA planning for clarification on the issues related to the Certificate of Alternative Development if it is an area of concern. And that's summary from paper. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Super, thank you, Des. I did declare an interest, but I have been working with constituents and speaking with landowners just in relation to this, because it is very prevalent given the A5, but this paper is a really good overview for other road schemes, because it'll not just be the A5 in relation to dealing with this. You raised a very good point there in terms of writing to LPS and the department to get some clarity around the Certificate of Alternative Development, because that is where some of the question marks and where, I suppose, as you pointed out, the Ulster Farmers Union have been lobbying in relation to that development land, so it'd be good just to get some clarity in relation to that. I am going to come straight to Keith for questions.
Thanks, Des. And it's maybe a comment, I don't know if it's a direct question, but at the very start of this you said about no farmer or landowner should be worse off. But my understanding is, if you look at that area, I had Macrofeld bypass went past Macrofeld obviously, and those farmers at that time, I think from memory the figure was 16 or 18,000, irrespective of what the figure was, okay. But that farmer couldn't replace the land because he or she couldn't buy the land for the same price. So you have a figure, and irrespective of what the figure is they get for the land, you cannot replace it because they can't buy to replace it. It's like driving your car today and you're insured and it's worth £10,000 if you have an accident and the insurance company giving you £1,000. It's the simple exact same principle. So they are worse off because, number one, you can't replace the land even today. You want to buy 10 acres today up that area, you can't buy it for the figure that they say land is worth. That's the first point I'm making. Whenever all this land becomes taken from these farmers, it's going to drive even higher. So farmers could be driving 20, 30, 40 minutes in tractors to try and get land. So they are going to be worse off. So I don't know what we do with that broadly with LPS, but I don't agree with the figure they're offered.
Sorry, Keith, just to clarify, is that the price per acre?
Yes. So, and this is probably, it's more a point is than a question. My concern is they are worse off because they can't replace the land they take. And even they could, depends where the road goes through their farm. If it's going through the middle, their farm's destroyed. So if they're lost that little bit to the side, so they try and replace that little bit to keep their business viable. And I think a lot of people don't understand a farm needs a certain amount to make it viable. It's like my car today, if I was driving down the road with only half a tank, I wouldn't get here. And I need a certain amount of petrol to get here. So I don't think people get that. Farms are not become viable, and then you can't get a replacement acreage. So I suppose the point is, I'm making, Chair, they are going to be worse off. The land price is not enough to fit to replace it. Even they could replace it. So that's an issue. And the bit about then development potential, technically all agricultural land is development potential in some degree or another. Well, that's,
which we need to get, I suppose that's a point we need to get clarity around.
So
from
I suppose
LPS.
the question I'm asking today is maybe not of you, as probably of the committee broadly. I think we need to contact LPS and say, whatever figure you're possibly offering, you can't actually buy it today, so whatever figure they've plucked out of the sky, it's not relevant.
But am I right in saying, Des, in terms of the price per acre, that could be different? So you will have different price per acre then, and when particularly when you're looking at this scheme being broken up? I'm talking about the A5 here.
The price per acre would, I suppose, reflect the local conditions and the local, across Northern Ireland. I know the Irish Farmers Journal, I think, is the document that produces an annual report on the value of agricultural land around Northern Ireland. I didn't go into that in any detail in the paper, but that varies from county to county and within counties across Northern Ireland. It also would be determined by, I suppose, the different kinds of land use on the, of the agricultural land that's being sold, and perhaps if there's any sort of permitted development or, on that land outside, that doesn't need plan permission, like farm buildings or anything like that. I think it's, as I say, I don't know. I'm basically taking my information from the sort of published guidance and looking back at for previous debates and previous discussions that have been had in committees and stuff. And you can tell that it does seem to be negotiated at a very, an individual basis. There's one farmer is appointing one guy, but there are people who have collective appointments as well. So I think that those are all issues with, I suppose, making sure that the individual landowner who's affected knows, is going through the full process and appointing somebody suitable so that they are getting the best for their, the best value for their land.
Yeah.
But I think, as you said, there isn't like a fixed price that everybody's just being awarded.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, Keith.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the last point, the land take and then the injurious affection, which is the impact on the rest of the acreage left. And then disturbance, and I appreciate there's always flexibility with injurious affection and disturbance, but the land take value broadly, they keep it the same in an area, because farmers do talk.
Yeah.
And they have to keep that a basic figure. I appreciate agricultural land in County Down can be different pricing up in the A5 route, but broadly it'll be the same in a particular area. So I think it just worries me about this whole LPS valuation. That worries me.
Well, we also, considering the A5, you have to remember that is a massive area.
Yeah.
We're not just talking. It stretches over.
Two adjoining neighbours, my point is, yes, it could be different from the north to the south. Appreciate that.
Yeah, well, I know, for example, Auchnachoy is going to be very, very different to near Londonderry, so Cahill,
Sure, thanks. And Des, thanks very much for the paper. Obviously, I popped in that meeting in the Senate chamber that day. Just listening, maybe on this for clarification, really, the main point raised that day was in relation to the Ulster Farmers Union saying that in the south it was different, it was classed as development land. Is that right? And is that in statute? Is the way they do it in statute, or is it controlled by local authority too down there? And obviously, is that then what we've got up here in terms of their certificate of alternative development? Well, what way is it in the south? Because that's the point we're making that day, yeah.
That is, yeah. I looked at that issue that they basically said that the land valuation given in the south leans more towards the development land than it does agricultural land. But I couldn't find any evidence that was the case. There certainly isn't anything in statute that says that that's the way the vesting process works. The vesting process, if you look at in the UK, in GB or in down south, it's all based on the idea of equivalence and market value. That's the way, so unless the highway authorities in the south are taking the same, I suppose, approach as Mr. Buchanan said, that all agricultural land is potentially development land and they are valuing it in that way.
Yeah.
I don't know. That isn't published. I would maybe need to, I suppose, maybe, I don't know, speak to a colleague from the Oireachtas, or perhaps maybe find some other way of getting evidence that that's the case down south. But I certainly wasn't able to find any.
No, 100%. And to be fair to you, and I went through the paper. That's my understanding, because I mean that's the point they raised. But it is probably for ourselves, and it's a very valid point that Keith has raised in terms of your class all agricultural land. Given the rules now on sustainable development in the countryside, Chair, we certainly need to clarify that, and maybe Des will come back in terms of talking to somebody else in the 26th, because that was the point was raised that day in the Senate chamber about what they classed it as, so that's the conversation we need to tease out ourselves, and maybe there's something there, but I would agree with asking those questions and getting some answers here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Deputy Chair.
Thanks, Chair. Des, again, thank you very much for the presentation. I think it's really useful, probably opens up even more questions. Particularly, I think of experiences I've had with constituents who dealt with the A8. That was a much smaller scheme than the A5, and it was over a decade ago, but there are still outstanding issues. One specifically pertaining to compensation assessed between capital value and market value on the same scheme, often side by side, but different assessments of the value of the property by LPS. So clarity, as you said, maybe from the LPS regarding that, either in written format or given evidence to this, would be very useful. Secondly, I raised at the joint committee session about claimants' time and the hourly rate that the department is allowed to be claimed for has ranged between £15 and £30, which is a significant difference. Everyone's time should be valued in the same way, but again, no clarity on what is considered a valuable amount of time. I also have concerns about the amount of land agents, and again, members who were involved in the A8, which again significantly smaller, said they were struggling to get the expertise. Yet we're told, it's anyone at all who's an estate agent can do it. Well, that's not the case. This is a very niche specific thing pertaining to a very specific process. So it would be good to know how many people out there are capable, given the scale of this work. And the final thing is the Certificate of Alternative Development Value. When been issued by the department, LPS have not awarded the full compensation on the site. They start off at a percentage value of 10% and work their way up. Why is that? And can we get clarity from them if that is a policy or why that is the case? Because again, this is an experience of people on the A8. So I think if anyone sitting in the A5 wants to learn from the experiences of others, that would be a good place to start, and that's certainly issues that I've seen flagged up and have to date received no answers on how they're going to be dealt with.
We'll probably follow that up. Des, unless you have anything that you have found in your research.
The only thing I could really comment on that there contribution from Deputy Chair was that just in terms of assessing the level of expertise that's available in Northern Ireland, it may be worth the committee writing to the Institution of Chartered Surveyors and just asking them, you know, their experience with the process and how many people are available. There was a couple of the other questions there that I were outside the remit of this paper, and maybe get back to you with regards to if that's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that would be really useful, Des. I appreciate that. But I think, Chair, I think it was yourself, Des, that raised it about seeking these issues in absolute black and white, because I'm not going to accuse anyone of shenanigans, but it seems that one could be accused of being shenanigan-like in the past about the way that the process has been dealt with. I mean, these are people's livelihoods, this is people's land, and when it's been taken away, they expect fair treatment, and it would be my contention that many in the past have not received anything like fair treatment, and it comes back to Keith's point.
There is a phone that's interfering with the system there. Just sorry, you could just hear a wee bit of interference. Sorry.
I know that was just to make those points, Chair.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry.
He phoned them in.
Following up on that point, I think, you know, because of I don't want to say lack of land deeds, because it's an anecdotal thing that, you know, but that can also put landowners under significant pressure that they have to sign on the dotted line, because the land agents have a whole wreck of people that they want to try and get through. So it can put a huge amount of stress and pressure on people, and I'm seeing that. There was a point, Des, I wanted to raise, which has come to me in terms of the Land Acquisition and Compensation Amendment Act Northern Ireland 2016, which was passed by the Assembly in May 2016, and that is about the provision of the basic loss payment, where they're entitled to a payment of 7.5%. Of a value of interest up to a maximum of 75,000, and then there's an occupier loss payment where there's a 2.5% value of interest on a maximum of 25,000, and that results overall in entitlement of 10% up to a maximum of 100,000. So this has come up for a very small number of people, and I'm just wondering if you have come across it, maybe relating to Cahill's point, but I'm just wondering if you have come across anything like that where that may be in place in other jurisdictions, and whether it's like for like, but you may not have that. I understand that is completely outside probably the scope of this report, but I just wanted to see if you'd come across it in passing.
I haven't, sure, but would you mind if I could put something together for you fairly quickly and have a look, you know, and see?
Yeah, because it obviously was revised in 2016, so that's very, very recent, to be fair. But it's just to see in terms of in line with inflation and things like that, and all of that point as well. So.
I think I probably wrote a paper. I think I did do something on that back in 2016, but I can't, you know, I can't recall exactly what it was. So I will have a look at my own records to see if I have a paper from then, but I can also look at it, you know, afresh and get back to you as soon as possible, if that's okay.
Super, that's great. Thank you. Members, is there anything else anybody wanted to raise or come in?
Sure, just in relation to DAERA, where are we then in terms of DAERA with this here?
I'm going to come to that.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, any other questions or points?
No, thank
you. I thought you would have picked up on the marriage value and ransom volume. I'm disappointed you didn't pick up
what, sorry?
The marriage and ransom volume there. I thought you missed that part.
Marriage value?
Oh, there's some. You missed that paragraph, kid.
Okay, wait. I think we'll move on. That's a good point. Sorry.
No, that's okay. Can I just seek consent that members are happy to write to the department in relation to certificates as suggested by Des, to write to LPS in relation to all of the issues raised, including how it maybe calculates prices per acre, and then also to write to the ICS. As suggested by Des as well. Happy with all of that.
Yeah, the chartered surveyors. Yeah. Happy with that?
So, the LPS?
Yes, and write to LPS with all of the issues raised.
Come up with
calculate.
Yeah. Okay. Happy with that? Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, one other point. See, could we write to local councils or whatever council is relevant with respect to planning So a farmer, e.g., loses a hen house or chicken house, okay?
So, yes, go on ahead. I
The
think.
point being,
yeah.
they lost that chicken house, which is their main income on that farm.
Yeah.
So they go to apply to replace it. They can't get it.
So I think
I'm
that
using it,
point
or anything to do with ammonia emissions,
yeah,
etc.
So the Agriculture Committee, so that was discussed, if you remember, during our, that was raised. And we might need to check in with the Agriculture Committee
Possibly.
just on that, because I think we did jointly write on that point. I remember myself and Robbie jointly writing on those points to the Minister and to the Finance Minister, and I think to the Infrastructure Minister as well, if I remember correctly. So we'll check back on that, but I'm nearly 100%, well, I'm not going to say 100%, I'm 90% certain that we did raise that point, Keith, because the ammonia strategy tied in with that as well, and how that will go as well. So we'll check on that, but I'm nearly sure we did right on those points. So once we find out, we'll come back on that point. Okay, Des, you're free to go now. So thank you for your report. It was really insightful, as always. So thank you for your time today, and apologies for keeping you waiting just beforehand. Our session ran over there.
Well, thank you, Karen. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so on the actual raised paper itself, are members content that we share that with the Agriculture Committee as well? Because obviously that was part of our conversations that day in that joint meeting. Are you content with that? Content. Okay, thank you. Okay, item 9 is SR 2024-202 Marcus Ward Street, Belfast Abandonment Order, Northern Ireland 2024. From pages 86 to 101 documents in relation to the statutory rule. The rule is subject to negative resolution. Sorry, my page is there. And for members, the purpose of the rule is to abandon an area of 28.66 square metres of land extending for 37.98 metres to the rear of the footway on Marcus Ward Street, Belfast. The rule is due to come into operation on the 23rd of January 2025. And 4 members of the committee considered the proposal for the statutory rule at its meeting on the 20th of November 2024 and was content. The examiner of statutory rules has reported on the rule and has no comment to make. Are members content with the statutory rule? Okay, thanks, Keith. So the motion is that the Committee for Infrastructure has considered SR 2024-202, the Marcus Ward Street, Belfast Abandonment Order, Northern Ireland 2024, and has no objection to the rule. Okay, item 10 is SL1, the Kinnard Park Garva Abandonment Order, Northern Ireland, and at page 103 you'll see the SL1 proposal for the statutory rule. The rule will be subject to negative resolution procedure. The rule will abandon an area of 1,341 square metres of carriageway comprising 2 parts and an area of 656 square metres of footway comprising 4 parts of Kinnard Park Garva commencing at a point 50 metres north of its junction with Fort Road. After completion of such works as the department considers necessary to provide alternative facilities. The abandonment has been requested by Diamond Architecture on behalf of Dante Limited, which owns the bed and soil of the areas to be abandoned to facilitate construction of a new housing development, which is plan application LA 01/2017/0394F refers. The roadway access to the sports complex at the site is to be maintained and remain open at all times when the work commences. So are members content with the proposal for the statutory rule?
Agreed.
Okay, thank you. Item 11 is subordinate legislation SL1 not subject to assembly procedure. Advise members that there's one proposal SL1 for statutory rule that not subject to assembly proceedings and is not required to be laid. This is at pages 107 and to 110 and is SL1 the parking and waiting restrictions Derry Londonderry Amendment number 2 Order Northern Ireland 2025. Ask members if they have any issues they wish to raise on the proposal. So massive members that they're content with the proposal for the statutory rule. Content. Okay. So item 12 is the forward work programme. At page 111 you'll see the draft forward work programme, and I'm just seeking agreement that members are content with the draft forward work programme, and that it'll obviously be updated to reflect any decisions that have been taken today. Content?
Chair.
Okay. And then item 13 is any other business. So does any other... Peter, you wanted to raise...
Something I've been thinking about for a while, in fairness, and I know that I mentioned this to you yesterday in terms of planning reform.
Yeah.
So it's a really hot topic. We all get contacted by constituents about this and the frustrations that people have about lack of access to the planning system. Even on the bigger topics as well, it's something that's really important for the construction industry and things like that. As I reflect on it more, I've noticed that other committees are looking into inquiries into significant issues. So Education Committee, Health, Executive Office. So having thought about it, and against the context of Labour looking into this as well, planning reform in England, I'm getting the impression that Northern Ireland could become a bit of an outlier in comparison to Scotland, England, and to the Republic as well. And obviously, as chair, it was one of the first items on the agenda whenever the Assembly came back. So would it be appropriate to do a bit of a deep dive into this in terms of a committee inquiry?
Yeah.
Just to sort of inform us better 1 year on. I know we get presentations and things like that, but within the magnitude of planning reform, I think would really inform us and bring us maybe as a committee up to date. That would be something as a committee would be interested in.
So I appreciate you raising this, and we spoke about this just briefly yesterday, and I think planning is an issue that all of us around this table are interested in and concerned about, and we're obviously getting the range of issues that are coming from both industry and constituents as well. Now, you'll remember, members, that whenever we did our strategic priorities, planning was contained within that planning day, and I think around this table that we did discuss about where we might take a potential inquiry. And as I said, the sad life that I live, I was looking at, that strategic plan before we came back, at the start of this month again to the Assembly, and it planning was one of the things that we were looking at, but it was contained within that report that we would check to see the scope of where the committee could go, because I know during that discussion, during the strategic priorities, we were looking at whether councils 10 years on, whether we had a remit as a committee to look at that, and also because there has been quite a vast amount of reviews and reports done in relation to planning, but the implementation of it has been a bit of an issue, is what has been done to date, that if we were going to do an inquiry, we could pin something that was different, or in relation to what work has already been done or the implementation. So we do have, and as you'll see in the work programme, we do have in it the Planning Improvement Programme, the Department for Infrastructure, they're going to be up next week. And we will have as well, we're trying to get in the Interim Regional Planning Commission. I know the Northern Ireland Chamber did get in touch way at the beginning and are keen to try and come in relation to the report that they produced, and I know an awful lot of members did talk about their report during that very first debate on planning. So there are items there which will help inform the committee, because I don't actually think we've heard an awful lot about planning from the evidence sessions that we have taken, but in terms of an actual focused evidence session on planning, these will probably be the first. So it might also inform ourselves as well as a committee of where and what area the committee might want to go in terms of an inquiry, because an inquiry is great from a committee perspective because we drill down into the area, but we also need to make sure that what comes out of the inquiry has teeth. that we do make a difference in the area that we're trying to do the inquiry in. I don't know if the clerks want to come in relation to that, or...
Yeah, Chair, I'm happy to sort of come in on that. So, as you rightly say, the committee has taken a significant amount of evidence, I suppose, on a plethora of planning-related issues, and I suppose there's still some elements of the previous actions from the strategic plan, as the Chair has said. I think we'd actually engaged research to see, I suppose, the brevity of reports that have been undertaken to sort of highlight the specific issues. As the Chair also says, we've got the Planning Improvement Programme and then the Interim Regional Planning Commission that have been invited to come and give evidence. So I think on the basis of the work to date that is still to come, it would be a good opportunity to then, obviously, for members, upon hearing that evidence, to consider perhaps any type of inquiry. And in terms of, really more importantly, when developing in terms of an inquiry, is the scope and the terms of reference that you want to drill down, as like the Chair said. So obviously, if you do a broad review where there's work that's already been done on a similar vein, so it's really, I suppose, about how the committee could build on that work and get focused scrutiny points or outcomes from that. But obviously, as a committee team, we will support, obviously, the committee in all of that.
So I think that's why we'd sort of try to get those people in quite early on in our forward work programme too, because you're raising a very valid, important point, and you know, we'll have legislation which will take precedence that will be coming down the track as well. But it's important that from a committee perspective, all of these briefings relate to something that we are going to be looking at, whether it's legislative work, even today in terms of the parking. That is going to play a role in development of legislation and things that will be coming down the track as well, and how that integrates with the stuff that we're looking at, the EV charging, the vets. So all of the evidence sessions that we are taking, and we've had a lot, you know, relate to something that we're going to be looking at. So I think that's why we had those people in quite early on, to try and inform where we could go then on that inquiry that would sort of more or less, I think, agreed at that strategic priority session. So sorry, I'll let you come in, Peter.
All right. I suppose,
and then I'll come to you.
Within that, I mean, if you agree to an inquiry in principle, you know, from that you go on to look at your terms of reference. You know, so could we today, as a committee, agree to looking at this and doing a deep dive? I'm not saying next week or upending the forward work programme or whatever else, but I mean, we could look following the next two sessions if you want, with the people coming in. I don't think we're going to change anything on the back of those, but it might inform us to then go, right, let's look at the terms of reference for an inquiry, and then we move on from there.
I get your point, but the terms of reference are going to be key for this committee in terms of what we get at the end goal. So from my perspective, I'm always looking at what's the end goal that we're going to achieve out of it. So to inform us in terms of the direction that we're going. We're not saying no, because we agreed in our strategic priority session that we would look at this, and this would be an area that we would perhaps take forward an inquiry in. But what we also need to do is check that we as a committee won't be outside of our own scope. So that's why
after those two presentations that we receive, can we work out the terms of reference from then? I mean, I think we know everything that needs done. We've had the debate last year, we've had the presentations, we've read the reports, we know what needs to happen, but it's just at the minute it doesn't feel like anything's happening at all in the context of the world moving on.
No, absolutely, we will be doing that, and that's why these people have been planned to come in, so that as a committee we can turn around and say, we're not just going on the back of what we feel. We've heard from people within these areas, from the department, from the Interim Planning Commission, and we're going to have others that will come in, but we need to ensure that our terms of reference are going to be right, that we're not already doing something that's been already done maybe 10 years ago, and just rewriting the script
Yeah,
again.
and we don't need to work out the terms of reference in advance of that. It would be
after
the vote
that.
then.
Yeah.
Just one other point, Chair, as well. So one of the other actions from the strategic planning and that second paper that the committee considered, there was a further action that's still to be followed up with the committee requesting sight of the regional guidelines that are currently being developed for the planning application validation checklists, which could also then have a bearing on whatever avenue the committee wants to look at, because that might also factor into that as well. So there's a few things to be working out. The RAISE paper has been commissioned. The third there was 3 actions: commission the RAISE paper, invite departmental officials on the planning improvement programme, and then thirdly was the site of that regional guidelines that is going to help departments in terms of the planning application checklists. So I think that's one measure that the department is obviously bringing forward to try and make it easier and get a lot of the accurate information in the first place, which may have a bearing on the way that the committee focuses any inquiry that it wishes to undertake. But as I say, that's from those point of views, and then obviously it would be a matter for the committee to determine how they want to shape that, should they decide to undertake an inquiry.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to bring Cathal in, if that's okay. Cathal, sorry.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I mean,
And then Mark.
just 3 quick points. I mean, one, we need to find out maybe where PSC, I'm just trying to think what was the last report in terms of what PSC done, and we'll inform some of that stuff as well. Clearly, I don't mind, and the terms of reference is going to be key, very important, because no point in us doing an inquiry if we don't get the proper terms of reference, what we're going after here, what we seek to do. It's a 2-tier planning system, and we need to recognise that. There's responsibility both at local level and ourselves, and that needs to be included, Chair. So, I mean, I'm happy to wait to see, like the validation checklist, that's only in now maybe 6 months or 4 or 5 months. It's only a period of time, but it will be roughly an idea of what we can view. But it's important. I don't have an issue looking at it. We just need to have the right terms of reference. Focused on them, 3 or 4 items. It doesn't need to be a long list. But coming out of what you said, Chair, is we need solutions and answers. They can be in recommendation form, but if we're looking at it properly, and I have a few ideas myself, but let's see what they're all saying first. There's a number of documents over the last 10 years, and it should inform us and give us a good scope. But I would like it to be focused and invite the likes of Nilgan as part of the process through those players are in the game with us. So certainly I'm happy enough to go with that. But I've been around planning for 20 years, so I mean, and what they inside out, I just want us, if we're doing it, let's do it right. Some of us have been on PSC for a long time. We know how the process works.
It needs to be focused via those terms of reference.
Absolutely.
I'm happy to wait for those presentations.
And the sooner we get absolutely, I would agree with the process. Yeah.
So, yes, Cathal, that fair point, as well, in terms of it, because it is, again, going back to that terms of reference, which is the key thing, because there's an awful lot of different sheets with planning too. You see, that's the thing with it as well. Mark, you're indicating there?
Thank you, Chair. Cal touched on the stuff there that I was going to say. Like yourself, Chair, I'd be, it's outcomes that are important here. We don't just want another inquiry or another report to tell us how rubbish planning is and how it's underperforming. Remember at an earlier juncture, I can't remember, was it in an ordinary meeting or was it that strategic forward planning day, that we considered looking at it through the prism of 10 years on from the transfer of function of the planning function to council. So look at sort of what has worked well, what hasn't worked, and why not. And it's in that role the council have, where we've heard repeatedly from the minister and the officials that councils are dealing with 99% of applications. It's they look at that autonomy and the relationship there, and just again, what legislative change might be required to actually improve things, as well as the practical changes that won't require the legislation and shouldn't take as long to implement.
Yeah, no, absolutely, because I remember having that discussion around the councils at 10 year on, because we're into 2025 now, and councils took that over in 2014. So we thought it would be a timely way, but again, it was scoping out just to make sure that we wouldn't be out of scope in terms of our committee remit in investigating that council perspective of things in relation to planning, and also the fact of, I think we were looking at tying in the local development plans too, because the delay, which is a frustration, of those local development plans that should be in place as well. So yeah, but to tie this conversation together, I think I'm taking from broad agreement that the committee, and because it was in our strategic priorities, that the committee is going to do an inquiry in relation to plan. I don't want to raise expectation in the public, because we do need to ensure that our terms of reference are right and that we get the right outcomes. But from taking broad agreement that we are going to look into that, but on the basis that we will wait in terms of agreeing what that will look like whenever we have had the sessions from the plan and improvement, the interim regional plan, and then on the back of some of those reports that we just need to check the scope. Peter?
Just to come back on it briefly, I mean, 100%, I mean, I think we can broadly agree in principle that we'd like an inquiry. Keen to know if any other conversations took place during that strategic meeting about other inquiries we could potentially do as a committee, and because I didn't know that it was cast iron that we would do one. However, I mean, I think terms of reference is key for a lot of this. You'd be doing inquiries all day, every day, and you wouldn't really get very far. So I think terms of reference key. That was never my intention to do that today and just crack on, keep it vague in general. But just a year on, again, from your motion, not really that much further. Just as a committee, it was being proposed today just to focus minds. In terms of getting the future terms of reference pulled together.
So with all due respect, Peter, I think everybody did get, the clerks did do up a document that was sent round to all of the committee after that strategic planning session, and contained within that were the actions underneath of each of transport, water and roads in relation to what the committee had agreed on that day. I think out of that report, the only one that we had looked at in terms of an actual inquiry was this particular issue. There was other ones, if you want to go back and read it, I can't remember what date that came out, but
I have these here, Chair, if you'd like me.
But maybe it might be worthwhile if you want to recirculate that again, just to. But we all did get a copy of that, which then breaks it down in relation to what our plans were under each section for that strategic priority day that we all agreed on that day.
I think just to say, it is important that, it is very much part of our work stream, right from day one of this committee. It's been front and central, and I think we do take our time and get it right, take all the evidence on board, so allow us to have a focused inquiry if we do decide that is the best course of action. It's quality, not quantity as well. Yeah. Very much should be the focus.
Yeah. And look, it may seem as well that we've taken a huge amount of briefings and evidence in relation to what we've been doing. The Department for Infrastructure is a huge department. And we have done good work. We have been able to do some things we have in terms of, we looked at the MOT, we pushed some of those issues, the taxis, the review. We got the letter back from the Minister, who has done a bit of a U-turn in relation to the review on that matter, and we're looking into that. So there are things that the committee have been doing during the time that we have been up. But yes, the legislation will be coming, it will take precedence. The budget will take precedence in terms of our committee sessions as well, because that's how we spend our money. And then obviously looking at what the committee can tangibly do. But if the clerks wouldn't mind resetting that document out just for members to have very close to hand, that they can see then what was all agreed under each action point, that would be great. Happy enough?
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, members. So the date, time and location of the next meeting will take place at 10 a.m. on Wednesday the 29th of January 2025 in room 29 Parliament Buildings at 10 a.m. Thank you everybody. I now adjourn the meeting. Thank you.
Committee Room 29. Sound.